Conflict, reconciliation, commemoration. Each precedes the next. As seen in many societies throughout time, whenever there is a conflict, reconciliation is necessary to ensure that the conflict peacefully comes to a close. Post-reconciliation, commemoration is necessary to show to future generations the dangers that caused the given conflict and the cost it took to bring it to an end. The latter two are necessary to ensure the first ends and never occurs again. This is a process that can be seen in many different societies, from ancient times to modern. It is essential for a society that has undergone conflict, especially if it's internal, to undergo this process in order for the society as a whole to heal. An ancient example of a society acknowledging the need for reconciliation and commemoration can be seen in Ugarit. Ugarit, founded approximately around 6500 BCE, was an ancient port city located in the northwestern side of modern-day Syria. Long after the city fell to the Sea Peoples during the early stages of the Late Bronze collapse, texts were uncovered that give a great insight into the life and times of these people. Particularly, it gives a great insight into their belief system, the ancient Canaanite religion. These texts are referenced by the abbreviation KTU, short for Kalschrift Text aus Ugarit. Of note for this video is specifically the KTU 1.4 section. This section shows an atonement ritual that this ancient civilization will perform. While it contains two separate portions pertaining to women and another to men, all are otherwise almost identical, especially for the purposes of this topic. All start off with an animal offering for purification, though it is the first between the two sexes. For the women, the first portion uses a ram, while the men give a donkey as an offering, the same as the second for women. They then ask for purification for their respective sex, and proceed to ask for atonement from all the different portions of the city, as well as foreigners. It then continues on to state that, regardless of who the accuser, whatever the reason for the sin, the sacrificial animal shall hope for impurity. The purpose of this atonement ritual is very important. This ancient society sought to put a stop to any internal conflict quickly and effectively. They very clearly understood the dangers of infighting and recognized that reconciliation was the first step to putting a swift end to any conflict. They clearly used this atonement ritual as their way of reconciling the two parties, by both getting one party to admit guilt and then gain the forgiveness of their pantheon of gods. This would act as a way of ending the matter, so that both sides could move on. In an analytical piece by Lauren Shadowski and Baruch A. Levine in 1999, titled The Miser of the Sons and Daughters of Ugarit KTU 1.40, they describe this document as describing ceremonies of redress and reconciliation intended to promote harmony and justice among the diverse ethnic elements of the population of Ugarit. They later go on to state that this ritual is so valued that it is part of their governing system, and that even the rich and powerful, kings and queens, were subject to it. This shows how much they understood and valued this process. It clearly was an important practice needed to maintain a civil society. No one was exempt. Moving on to more recent events, the same conflict, reconciliation, commemoration sequence can be seen in Rwanda. In Rwanda, there are two major ethnicities, Tutsi and Hutu. Of note is that the Hutus are the clear majority in the country, 85% being Hutus and only 14% being Tutsis. The remaining 1% goes to the Twa people. Back in 1994, in a span of about 100 days, between 500,000 to 1 million Tutsi and sympathetic Hutu peoples were brutally murdered by the Hutu government. This racially charged bloodbath did not come out of nowhere, however. According to the group United to End Genocide, the ethnic divide between the two groups had been present since colonial times. This was primarily due to Belgium, the colonial power at the time, primarily putting Tutsis in charge, as they viewed them to be superior to Hutus. Eventually, however, Belgium gave more and more power to the Hutus, till they ultimately left the country in 1962. This began a period where the Hutus started driving the Tutsis out of the country, which inevitably caused a civil war in 1990 between the Hutu government and RPF, the Rwandan Patriotic Front. Many members of the RPF were Tutsis, and were upset and angered at the way the government had treated Tutsi refugees. While peace was established in 1992, it was an uneasy one, made worse when then-President Juvenal Habyarimana attempted to integrate RPF leaders into government positions. While well-intentioned, this backfired a great deal. The following year, on April 6, 1994, tensions boiled over when Habyarimana was killed when his plane was shot down. While no one knows for certain who really did it, suspicions have landed on both sides. What is known, however, is that the government blamed the RPF. Since 1990, they blamed all their socio-economic problems on the Tutsis, and claimed all Tutsis were part of RPF. With the murder of a Hutu president, along with many other high-ranking officials in the government, all hell broke loose soon afterwards. Government groups, such as the Presidential Guard, joined forces with both the army and various Hutu extremist militia groups to start a genocide within 1 hour of the president's murder, according to the History Network. They began a massacre on the streets and the homes of Rwanda, murdering every Tutsi they could get a hold of, along with moderate Hutus. This included the Prime Minister and her 10 bodyguards, who were murdered a day later. With all the dead leaders of the country creating an opening, Hutu extremists filled the political void. RPF responded to the slaughter and fought back. With little support from the UN or any other international forces during the majority of the slaughter, they managed to fight off the Hutu and government extremists, taking control of the majority of the country back by July of that same year. As soon as the fighting finished that July, reconciliation attempts started. The government that the late president had previously agreed upon shaped up, with Tutsi RPF leader Paul Kagame becoming the new vice president and defense minister, and Hutu moderate Pastor Bizimungu becoming the new president. This was to show a sign of solidarity and unity between both ethnicities. After that, however, reconciliation between the two groups gets a little messy. Both sides still had strong hatred towards one another, and there was good reason for it. According to Eugenia Zorbas in a 2004 journal entry in the African Journal of Legal Studies, RPF had committed war crimes during the Civil War and had killed untold thousands of Hutus in both Rwanda and what is now the modern-day Congo in the process, both before and shortly after the genocide. She states that this tends to be forgotten, understandably so, as the Rwandan genocide was just a bloodbath on a whole other level in comparison. Reconciling the two groups was never going to be easy, and was always going to be messy. The first step was to bring the perpetrators to justice. To do this, the UN set up the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, ICTR, in 1995. Unfortunately, the ICTR has not been a strong enough force for justice. It took them 8 years to convict 10 people and arrest 56 other officials. By the time they closed down in 2015, they had only indicted 93 people overall, according to their own website. This number includes RPF members as well, which angered Tutsi people greatly, as many Hutu people responsible for the massacre managed to escape justice through various means. Only making matters worse was the fact that only 10 Rwandan lawyers survived the genocide. The legal system, along with the political system, had been demolished. Most of the rich and powerful of Rwanda were killed in the genocide, unless they were part of the genocidal government, and those who were arrested. However, Rwanda proved more efficient than the UN, as they built up their judicial system from the ground and tried over 5,500 people by 2004. This was done through a grassroots court system called Gakaka. An ancient system, it is a tradition that encourages victims to speak out about crimes committed to them, and for those guilty for said crimes to atone and apologize for their actions, and for both parties to come together once a week and meet on the grass. This very clearly and obviously shows how they knew that reconciliation was necessary to move on, and to help with the process of healing. It has its problems, however. While the government incentivized people going through this traditional route rather than Western-style courtrooms, Gakaka includes giving away all the details of one's crimes, including co-conspirators, which socially is extremely hard to convince someone to do. Regardless, this reconciliatory tradition worked far more effectively than anything the UN did. On top of all of this, Rwanda set up a National Unity and Reconciliation Commission, the NURC, where they invited people of all different backgrounds and status to join in, mingle, and participate in various workshops and such. as an attempt to create unity between these estranged people. Moreover, fighters on all sides during the genocide were forced to take 6 to 8 week courses on a variety of topics together. This created stronger bonds between the groups, most likely to go at arms first should tensions ever arise again. No one wants to fight someone they laughed at in class once upon a time. Coming to the commemoration portion, Rwanda has not shied away from their past. There are many monuments and memorials that serve as reminders throughout the country. They are almost peppered throughout the land, done intentionally to show younger generations what violence really looks like and what took place there. On that note of what violence really looks like, one of the more famous memorials is the Murambi Genocide Memorial Center. They take the sense of showing what violence looks like to an extreme. How? Well, according to the Genocide Archive of Rwanda, Murambi was one massacre site. Tutsi people were hiding in a church there, and were told by their supposed leaders that the French would protect them if they traveled to the school. They were tricked into exposing themselves, and were killed. Of the 50,000 that were there, only 34 survived the event, and 45,000 dying that day. Nowadays, despite containing thousands upon thousands of graves, many bodies are openly shown. School grounds that the victims were told to go to and find the French was reopened, with many a reminder of what occurred there during the events of 94. While the Memorial Center, with all the human remains openly shown, is very uncomfortable, is a very strong and profound reminder that violence should never ever be the go-to response and should be avoided at all costs. Moving on to South Africa, we avoid much of the violence seen in Rwanda. Why? Because unlike in Rwanda, South African leaders understood that unless they treaded carefully, a bloodbath, the likes that have never before been seen, would take place. One of the most racist systems to exist in the modern world, apartheid, was never going to go down easily. Without delving into too much detail, apartheid was essentially a system that the Ku Klux Klan drools over. In place since 1949, when mixed marriages were outlawed, though there were already unofficially apartheid policies in place before 1940, it lasted until 1991, when the President F.W. de Klerk repealed many apartheid policies with the help of humanitarian legend Nelson Mandela. First, how did apartheid come to be? Starting in 1949 and continuing through the 50s, legislature was passed to ban mixed marriages, give over 80% of land to whites, requiring people of color to carry ID at all times, and segregation. In a 2013 episode of the British show Live at the Apollo, South African comedian Trevor Noah discussed what it was like growing up in South Africa under apartheid. I grew up in South Africa. I grew up there in a time known as apartheid. This world was very awkward for me growing up, because I grew up in a mixed family. My mom was arrested for being with my dad. She would get fined, she would get thrown into prison. They had me, which was illegal, so I was born a crime. As a family, we couldn't be seen together. My father would have to walk on the other side of the road, and he would just wave at me from afar, like a pedophile. My mom could walk with me, but if the police showed up, she'd have to drop my hand and pretend like I wasn't hers, because we weren't supposed to exist as a family. It was horrible for me. I felt like a bag of wheat. It was a tough time. Many outside nations had denounced apartheid, including the UN in 1973, and they additionally imposed an embargo on South Africa in 1976. By 1985, many other major countries had joined in with economic sanctions. Inside South Africa, there was also strong opposition to these hateful laws. Many people peacefully protested and organized strikes to oppose the system. Political action was taken, but to no avail. Eventually, armed resistance was mounted by various groups, but was all squashed by South African leaders. One of the people incarcerated for leading such a group was Nelson Mandela, who was imprisoned from 1963 to 1990. His imprisonment helped bring media attention worldwide, helping to bring an end to the regime. By the time Mandela was released, the South African government was crumbling due to internal and external pressure. They gave way to allow F.W. de Klerk to take over, and he worked with Mandela to repeal the racist policies of apartheid. By 1994, a new constitution was written, creating a South Africa that was fair and kind to all its citizens. But how did they avoid bloodshed? There's much support for apartheid, and surely those in favor would cause a backlash. And they did. In 1993, a prominent anti-apartheid leader was assassinated by white extremists, but Mandela managed to keep the peace. Dave Chappelle had a very good analysis of this, likening it to advice for the Me Too movement in his latest comedy album, The Bird Revelation, released in 2017. You can't make lasting peace that way. You got all the bad guys scared, and that's good, but the minute they're not scared anymore, it will get worse than it was before. Fear does not make lasting peace. Ask black people what this city really needs. Without irony, I'll say this. The cure for LA is in South Africa. You mother effers need truth and reconciliation with one another, because the end of apartheid should have been a freaking bloodbath by any metric in human history, and it wasn't. The only reason it wasn't is because Desmond Tutu and Mandela and all these guys figured out that if a system is corrupt, then the people who adhere to the system are incentivized by that system, and are not criminals. They are victims, and the system itself must be tried. But because of how systems work, it's so compartmentalized. As far as information, the only way we can figure out what the system is if everyone says what they did. Tell them how you participated. Mandela managed to unite the country like no one before him. He forged a peaceful path as best he could, earning him the Nobel Peace Prize along with de Klerk in '93. He understood the need to reconcile and unite the country, not antagonize. He blamed the system for its oppression, not the people involved. He knew that feeding the anger that was still there after years of apartheid would only make things worse. The only way to move forward was to forgive, but never forget. He used sport, specifically rugby, to unite the country behind their national team, and they won the Rugby World Cup that year, bringing the country closer together through sport, only possible due to the knowing actions of Mandela. They never forgot the past, however. Constitution Hill, located in the city of Johannesburg, South Africa, is a former prison complex that held many famous revolutionaries, such as Mandela and Gandhi. It now serves as a museum, showing how South Africa went from one of the worst countries in the world to one of the most progressive in terms of constitutional equality. It shows how hard Mandela and others had to work, how much they had to suffer, and how much they had to sacrifice, so that future generations got the equality that some fought and died for. It shows that this freedom that we all have, we shouldn't take it for granted. Freedom, democracy, and equality are all things that people have been fighting for. Future generations should not take them lightly. They should learn from this and ensure that they don't go down the same path. Hopefully, at least they won't. As has been shown, once conflict arises in a society, it is imperative that the society reconciles all parties. Uyghurs showed this in their atonement rituals, ending problems before they fester too long. Rwanda didn't and paid the price, and a steep one at that. This reconciliation process is highly effective, as shown by South Africa, in easing fissures in communities and countries. What should have been a bloodbath was nothing close. The commemoration phase is to show future generations what was lost, and what those lessons they learned cost. Commemoration shows two things: how bad things can get, and how, no matter how bad they are, people will always find a way to make things better. But that always comes at a steep cost. It is best that future generations learn from the mistakes and lessons of the past, lest we allow those who do not learn from history to repeat it.